I thought we would just start with a quick introduction from you, if that's all right, Alex, around what motivated you to start investigating this topic.
So the starting point was when I came out of being a head teacher, and I started to notice how the generation of students I'd been responsible for when I was a head, well, I had 12 years, how they were being described in the media. And then I started to hear the same things being said by my peers, in the various organizations they work in. And then I was also hearing it from my coaching clients. So it started as we can't recruitment is, we can't find them. If we find them, we can't keep them. But if we keep them, we don't understand them. And then, well, what should we focus on today? Well, let's talk about what I'm going to do with my snowflake younger staff. I thought, okay, see the issue here. So there was just this tremendous dissonance, what I remembered them being like, and how they were being viewed coming into the workplace. So I just started to dig.
So generalizations are really difficult, aren't they? And I really worry about assumptions and people feeling pigeonholed. So I just want to say with transparency that I know that that could be an issue for some people who are looking at this topic. Before we start delving into what the typical sort of differences are between the generations, how do you address that concern?
I find the concept a useful way of analysing how change over time has impacted on outlook. And change, social, political, economic, technological, it does have an impact on how people see the world, particularly growing up in your formative years. But it's not a guillotine between them. We're not talking about different species here. It's differences within generations are far bigger than those between, and they are social constructs. So I always recommend people are treated as individuals first and foremost. Stereotypes don't help anybody, and no one likes being stereotyped. And Gen Z certainly don't. Probably more than anybody else. But they've inherited the economic situation that they have, and the technology that arrived and coincided with them, the oldest ones, going through their teenage years, was not their doing. It's just what they've experienced.
So positioning it really as a reflection of all the context that's going on in the world and more locally in their society. These are the kind of attributes or characteristics or thought processes that people are likely to have.
More likely to have as well.
More likely to have.
So part of the challenge for this, I think, and particularly the multi-generational workplace in mind, is to articulate the idea that age diversity is a wonderful thing, and organisations don't make the most of it.
Yeah.
And that perspective does matter. Now you've got all the intersectionality elements, between it, and in many staff rooms across the country, you've got a real mix of people coming from different places and all those kinds of things. So, age as an important feature of diversity, and the extent to which the whole staff body can come together to help solve the big problems rather than relying on the top table to sort it out.
How can we absolutely encourage those types of conversation and that understanding between different generations, so there is a sense of inclusivity and belonging for everybody? So perhaps now we should just tip into what are the key differences across the generations which seem to be causing issues in schools or workplaces in general.
Well, I'd say for Gen Z, they are far less likely to have done work experience at school. A survey done a couple of years ago by Speakers for School showed it was less than 1 in 4 had done work experience at school, a proper placement, which I couldn't believe, actually. Oh, really? But also, there's a lot of earning that goes on these days, which is not in a physical workplace. If people are buying and selling vintage clothes, or what they call vintage clothes, online, you might be earning, you might have learned how to do all kinds of things, but you've not been doing it in a physical workplace where people 10, 20, 30, 40 years older than you. And a school is a particular kind of workplace, I think. There's a certain intensity to it. It's all packed into the 6-7 hours, during the day. There's the pace. Often you're not working with other adults. Predominantly you're working with your client base, call them that, with the students. So they haven't had the same reference points of work. And even, for those, the roots of, what was the school direct or teach first routes, that also cuts out what the PGCE experience gives you. I'm not saying one route's better than another, but a PGCE is by its nature longer. You're having to navigate staff room politics, all those kinds of things. And it's a far higher chance these days that a graduate turns up for the first day in the first proper job, and that is the first experience they've got of a workplace like that.
And I remember, Alex, when I was on my first teaching practice, and the first day I got out of my car, walked through the door of the school, and a student came up and went, "Miss, Miss," and I was like, I'm not Miss, I'm not Miss. But as soon as you're in school, you're on, aren't
Yeah,
you?
you are. Yeah, you are.
Mentally,
Yeah, you are.
physically,
You are.
emotionally available to anybody who needs you.
Yeah.
And that potentially, if you're coming from a place of working from home or being sheltered and not physically available to people, and you can pick and choose a bit how you communicate, that could be a bit of a shock and a steep learning curve.
Yeah, and those look for Gen Z, their academic record is off the scale. Now we can look at how effective schools have been and the resources and the culture around that, all that kind of stuff. But I do think we've ended up with an imbalance between the qualifications and the soft skills. The culture around, right, here's your mock exam, you've done your mock exam, here's your personalised learning checklist, here's all the links to the whatever it is to learn how to do this, here's the past paper, here's the Saturday session, the Wednesday session, all those kinds of things. I'm not criticising what I've said, there's been an impact. And teaching requires hundreds, ideally, of micro decisions a day. The whole process of the craft of the classroom, there's lifetime skills in that.
Yeah.
And there's an enormous amount of think on your feet. And that's a big adjustment from having incredible quality of resources to work through to make sure you get your 7s, 8s, and 9s, your A stars, and your first class degree. I think the shift from undergraduate life into initial years in teaching, that is one hell of a gear change.
Because what I'm hearing there is that the quality teaching that they have received up until that point, which has been resource rich and instruction rich, could potentially have generated a slight learned helplessness tendency, or certainly a reliance on that level of support, which, as you've alluded to, when you're on your own in front of 30, 32 kids, isn't available to you. And that can be a real shock.
On average, I think the onboarding process has to assume a lower level of reference points for the workplace and all those kinds of things. But if you put decent resources in place and the expectation of where you've got to be, you will see them take off. They expect to see some rigor. And, because that's how they approach things.
Yeah.
And again, more likely rather than they all are. But in terms of the hunger for just burning the way through one online course after another, picking up this or that skill, all those kinds of things, the idea of becoming a manager by stealth or getting a job by process of elimination, say, it is not, well, that's not quite professional enough. And I have this quite a lot, actually, that I might be asked to come in and speak to or train the middle management group, all of whom ended up in their jobs because they've been there for a certain amount of time. And, not saying they couldn't do it or weren't good at it, but they were really quite flustered, if I put it that way, at the expectations of the junior colleagues of them. Just that extra layer of detail can make all the difference. And I think as an employer, if you find yourself thinking, well, I don't have to tell them this, do I? I'd say in this day and age, you probably do. Your attempt to be clear will be appreciated, and those who don't need to start on page 1 won't, because they're very used to guiding themselves through whatever online training thing and so on that it might be. Sink or swim doesn't cut it as a, you get to the point where, look, you've got to be able to do this, otherwise you can't progress. That's a perfectly reasonable conversation. And if you're a professional, whatever it is, you've got to get used to the scaffolding is coming away. You've got to get used to that idea. But that's not an excuse for not scaffolding in the first place.
Yeah. And I was speaking with an ECT a couple of weeks ago who had done our coaching experience. And she was saying exactly that the reflective time that gave her has basically sustained her during this period, and that if she didn't have that experience,
Yeah.
she wouldn't have been thinking that she had the resourcefulness inside her, because she
Yeah,
would have
yeah,
been looking
yeah,
outward, and she'd
yeah,
been saying, why aren't people helping me? Why aren't the answers coming to me? But
yeah,
what the coaching and reflective space did was made her look inward and go, well, I suppose I could try this, and really
yeah.
think
That's right.
about it.
That's right. That's right. There is definitely also a lot of people being reluctant to ask, to use channels that might be available, and can worry a bit too much about standing out, not wanting to be seen as high maintenance, and all those kinds of things. And sometimes schools and other organisations are good at having those channels, and sometimes they're not.
Yeah, and this might come down to relationships and
Yeah,
culture
yeah,
and psychological safety.
yeah. Right. So if you've got an ECT that's got a full set of grade 7 plus at GCSE, 2 A stars at A level, and a first class degree, and then finds themselves going into teaching because they're socially minded, and by the end of September they feel like they've been hit by a bus, they may not have failed, inverted commas, or feel like they were coming close to that at any point. And it can be quite paralyzing, that. Their expectations of themselves as a young professional can be phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Phenomenal. And if you end up, I know it's an unhelpful thing to do to quantify it. If you end up after your first year of teaching, if you're a solid 6 or 7 out of 10 teacher, you've done incredibly well. And there'll be a lot of decisions you've made that you wouldn't make again, a huge learning experience and so on. But when you've been trained throughout your school career, well, you can get to 100%, this is how. And then into professional life, it is different.
Yeah.
It is different. And there may be a need to be kinder to yourself.
I was at this conference yesterday where someone was espousing the virtues of using we when you onboard people into your team. We are here for you. You are part of a team.
Yeah,
You are
yeah,
part of a
yeah.
professional development community. You're not on your own here, and that seems to be coming through from what you're saying as well.
This is a really difficult job. I would say it is the collective responsibility of any workforce to know each other and to take the time to understand each other's perspectives. Opinions, coming from different age, different ethnic background, whatever it is, there is enormous richness in staff rooms, and by having those conversations, there's so much to gain. And as retirement ages climb in teaching, and as they are everywhere else, the age range in the staff room is only going to grow, and it only makes that kind of dialogue more important.
Thank you so much for your time today, Alex. It's been a real pleasure to hear your insights. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Catherine.
Absolute pleasure. Bye for now.